So our speaker tonight is Bermes, who's a senior product manager at Firefox Mobile. And she's also the author of Lean Websites, which you all got a raffle ticket to win a copy for tonight, which we'll draw for after the talk. But we're really excited to have her here. She's previously also worked as a senior architect and performance advocate at the CBC, where she focused on mobile web development and performance optimization. She also recently published her book, Lean Websites, and her talk today will focus on one of the most important chapters of the book, Performance Cheat Sheet, which is about a set of a dozen exercises that'll guide you through practicing web performance. So she's an international speaker, an author, a contributor to JS Manners, and also the organizer of Toronto Web Performance Meetup Group. Please give a warm welcome to Barbara Bermes.
All right. Sound okay? Perfect. Okay, let me see if all this stuff works. Give me 1 second. Okay, perfect. All right. So some facts, although Anna already kind of introduced me nicely. If you have not seen me speak before, what I normally do is I talk about some personal stuff. And one of the things is I really like burritos. So normally when I go to different cities and countries to speak, I normally ask people in the audience if they can suggest a good burrito place. But I guess since it's in Toronto, I kind of know most of the burrito places already. But if you still have, burrito place that you want to suggest, tweet at me or just, come speak to me after. And yeah, I am currently a senior product manager for Android, for Firefox on Android, and this is a little fennec, and we call internally, we call the Firefox on the Android fennec. So that's why I put this little fox there. All right, disclaimer. You will hear me say a lot more in the book because obviously, I want to make lots of money from this event because you're all going to buy the book. So you will hear that a lot. But yeah, why am I here? As I said, because I really want to make the big bucks. And you should all buy the book. But joke aside, so it's just too much content to cover. Like 300 pages in 30 minutes. So obviously I had to pick a few special things that I want to point out. And the rest, or if you want to read or learn more, you can either talk to me or buy the book. Is it worth the money? No. So I put all my everything that I wrote, I always committed to GitHub, and GitHub have a really good another plugin or a tool which is called Git Stats, and it helps you figure out trends when you write, what days you normally write, and how long you write, and clearly that represents how I was doing this. So basically, what I did is I woke up early mornings. That's where you see at 8 or 9 o'clock is my peak time of committing things. And my most productive days, I guess, were, well, I try to write on weekends as well, but you can clearly see Saturday was my day off, so I didn't really write a lot. It's a neat tool, and it kind of, showed to me again how much work that actually is. So it's not worth the money. It's a lot of time and weekend writings. Before I get started, I would love to get a better sense of who's here tonight in terms of profession. Because there will be probably some very technical pieces that I might skip then or just go over quickly. So any developers, engineers. Okay, it's almost half, I think. Designers. Okay. Project managers. Okay. Marketing. Okay, also important, good. Sales. Woo, okay. So I'll try to target it, kind of spread out to the audience. So why should you care about web performance or performance? This is not to give in to the developer's OCD that they want to write nice and fast code, but it's also about the business, right? So people don't like to wait. And you don't want to make them creative with waiting and putting like ketchup and mustard all over the place. So as I said, people don't like to wait. And this is one thing that Google was doing a survey or research paper, and you can see here also as number one, and especially when it comes to browsing on a mobile device, what are the things that people get very annoyed with? And clearly, it's when you have to wait for your page to load. Also, in general, when you look at the trends, or when you look at how big websites have grown over the years. So when you look at the blue line, that's the mobile file size, the average file size of a web page that you're loading. So it's almost, well, it's tripled, 3x. 4x actually. It's 4 times bigger than it used to be in 2011. And I don't think there will ever be like a gap where it's not growing. So there's a lot of data that is being transferred to the browser or to your user. And especially if it's on mobile, data plans are still very expensive or weirdly structured, I find. So probably people have to pay for your bad performance. Yeah, now this is kind of for all the sales and marketing people, this is like the winning argument. 79% of online shoppers will not return to a website if they've experienced the website to be slow or sluggish or any of that stuff. The other one is 1 second. So if you add 1 second or subtract 1 second to your load time, that can have huge implications. So 1 second could be, if you 1 second delay, you have 11% fewer page views. You might have 7% loss in conversion, 16% decrease in customer satisfaction. And what I find is extremely interesting, what Amazon reported is if they go 1 second slower, they predict to lose 1.6 billion in sales per year. So I think those are all very good arguments or the reasoning why we're here and why we actually want to care about this. If you're interested in more of those, those stats from different companies, it's great to check out this website and maybe even show that to your boss and say, see, this could happen to us as well if we don't pay attention to performance. So that's kind of as a little intro why you should care. Let's look at the chapters. So the first one is shape a performance culture. And from within the company that you work, it's not necessarily that you have to right away dive into code and make it very performant and fast, but you should start with the people in the organization and find the people who actually make those decisions. But how do you do that? How do you shape a culture of performance? Make everybody care about performance. And because at the end, it's everybody's business. So if you're a marketing person, if you're a salesperson, if you're a developer, this is all your business. You're working for a website or for a business. Feel empowered and encouraged to say no in whatever role you are, even if or specifically if you're a developer. I've done that also in the past where I said, well, we should really consider thinking about the performance implications. So I'm going to show you later a system, what I call the performance point system, that maybe helps translate those, conversations between developers and designers. Another very important thing is that once you do go through like a performance improvement, you should celebrate it. This is a great thing to do for the company. Etsy, perfect textbook example. So what Etsy does, I assume all of you have probably shopped at Etsy before. And what they do, they have an amazing engineering department and even like a specific dedicated performance department or team. And they call out performance heroes every month, I think. So if somebody has done a great job, they put it on their blog post or on their blog. They blog about it. They share everything. They even have their own little stickers that they sell on Etsy themselves, so you can even order them. And yeah, be transparent and share your results. I like that as well. So they have these performance report that they quarterly publish, and in there they stick to what they say, or sometimes they even say, okay, we've gone worse with our homepage, but let's work on that in the next quarter. So being transparent, it gives kind of a commitment also to yourself and the organization. Say, hey, we've said that we would do it, so let's really, really do it. So I think kind of the magic formula is performance as a combination of perception, so individual subjective perception, and respect. And perception, as I said, is you can't really do much about that because it's very subjective. Somebody perceives something fast or slow. Probably my father, a slow loading website, he doesn't consider it slow, but I will consider it slow. But you also can control respect, or you can control respect. And the greater the respect you show to users, that you make them not wait long, the more they will like you and love you. So avoid any unnecessary delays. This is a screenshot from the book. So if you want to read more, you should buy the book. You can bucket, or we can bucket ourselves in following criteria, like if something feels instant, if it's less than 100 seconds, and so forth. I'm just going to, very dry. And for example, anything that is above 10 seconds is kind of a, forget it, I'm just going to go to a different website or do something else. Another good question to ask yourselves is, how long does it take my user to start interacting with my web page? Assuming you all have a web page or your business has a web page, each website should have a goal. There's a reason why people should go there. So you want to make sure that even like kind of counting the steps that it takes for your user to achieve the goal that you want them to achieve, and see each of those steps, how you can improve those as well. So for example, if you add something to a shopping cart, how long does it take for a user actually to get to the shopping cart? So work with the designers on that. Another really great quote from one of the performance engineers at Google, Ilya, he once said, well, treat speed as a feature. This is not a nice to have. This should be part of your development or software development process. Another one is optimize from your user's perspective. So what this means is record real user monitoring data, which I explain in the book as well. So what that basically does is it checks what your real users are experiencing, because if you're developing a website at your company, super high speed, and maybe your audience is actually maybe in a more developing country where internet speeds are not that great, you can't just assume only because you sit somewhere in a high-speed internet zone and your website performs well that it will perform everywhere for all your users. The other one is, which is probably more for the designers here, or just as an idea, that you wireframe for performance. So start early on to think about performance and how you include it. And that's where the performance point system comes in. So as I said, sometimes it's important to bridge the gap between designers and developers, and we all have different languages, the way and expertise of how we see the world and how we solve problems. And not every designer is a developer, and that is totally fine. You don't have to. But over the year, and I've seen it over the years, it just helps to somehow, find that gap between those two languages and speak a common language. And that's why I tried to come up with the performance point system. So let's check out an example. So this is time.com. This is a film strip. So I've created this with web page test. It's an excellent website, free tool, where you can run website tests on. And it always, like, you can even specify, okay, I'm now on a 3G network in, I don't know, Spain, and then you let the website run on that specific machine or a setting configuration, and then you see in a film strip how the website loads. So this is, as I said, time.com, and you can see that after, well, it starts, but after 4 seconds, it slowly starts loading stuff, and then after second 8, you have 100% of the content loaded. So let's kind of try to reverse the wireframing here. So you see the time.com, you see after I do this. So what I try to do is like kind of go back and create a wireframe out of what you just saw. And you see, I kind of clearly said above the fold, so everything that the user will see. Then you see the section header and the special sections coming in. So all those elements are slowly coming in while it's loading. So let's look at it now based on how it's been loaded and what pieces start to show up first. So in this case, you see the right side. I think that's a special section. Then you see the menu, the hamburger, the logo. Some links show up. And then after 5.7 seconds, you see most of the stuff appearing. But, I mean, the stock widget is still not loaded. So you see slowly things are coming in. I don't know if that was the greatest order of how things should have appeared. So let's talk about that now. If we look at all those graphical elements on the page and how and when they're being loaded, we can kind of guesstimate their load time, how long it will take for certain elements to load, to come to the page. So let's try to correlate this to the performance impact. So what I try to do here is I have my low impact, medium impact, and high impact elements of the page. And I kind of give them points. And again, this is more maybe like that common language that you can say to your designers, hey, if you put a lot of large images on the page and you, this is maybe not necessarily the developers, but just business and so sales and marketing, oh, but we need those third-party scripts to track what people are doing. This all costs, that costs time and file size and load time. Like everything you put on your page will increase the load time. Like it will not go away. It's not going to make it faster. So how about we take all the elements that I showed you on the time.com page and assign those modules to them. So can you see? So I guess you can see what I did here with the different shades of gray. It's not 50 shades of gray, just 3. And so you have the high, medium, and the low impact things. And now we circle the order in which they actually were loaded. And as I mentioned earlier already, is this really the smartest way of loading things? Because, you know, I would think things like an image or the headline, especially if this is a news website. So why do people go, especially during breaking news, why do they go to your website? Because they want to see right away the headline and everything that is related to that, maybe a blurb or something. So with the performance point system, you can probably get a better agreement and understanding with UX what needs to go above the fold and therefore has to be prioritized or should be prioritized. So one thing I could think of is start with the menu, then get, as I said, number 2, like the image and the summary of the story first. This is focus on loading that first, then maybe the latest headline list. This is, again, just an example. You figure out what are the important pieces of your website, and even if you use heat maps, those are tools as well that can tell where people are normally going the most. So maybe load those things first. There's lots of ideas and lots of good thinking, especially as talking developers and designers with each other. And also here, I have more examples and more details in my book. Measure first, then optimize, and keep doing that. So now let's talk a bit more technical or more analytical here. It's great to have a performance budget. Gives you and sets a very nice baseline and a goal that you can work towards too. And one of the really good things, there are a lot of tools out there that you can use, free tools, as I mentioned, like the web page test, page speed insights by Google. Those are all tools that help you, first of all, measure and get a baseline and then come up with a performance budget. And it's always good to look around and see what other people are doing, especially, I'm sure you all have competitors wherever you work. So look at your competitors. So here, because I like J.Crew and Banana Republic, I just picked those two as an example. So this is this is a shopping experience. And with the web page test comparison tool, you can also align websites next to each other and have them load on the same configuration wherever, if it was a 3G network or whatever you defined. So in this case, you see clearly that, what is this, J.Crew kind of wins this battle here. But as I mentioned, compare yourself and see if you need to be way better than your competitors, if you're already way better, but you can always get better, so you shouldn't stop. What are some criteria, or what are some metrics that you can look at and give you good value? There's one, it's called speed index. It was introduced by a web page test, which I've mentioned several times already. So the smaller the number, the better the site's performance. That doesn't apply to page speed, which is Google's answer to web page test or speed index. And here it goes, the score goes from 0 to 100 points, where the higher score is better. So if you go to page speed, Google's product, you can let your site run through that, then you get that index or that number, and then you have a better understanding how bad or how great your website is. Speed curve is another great tool. I think there's always some free versions available for maybe just one site that you have. This gives lots of very nice visual elements and tools that you can plot your stuff and compare your websites with others and competitors. So this is I recommend that as well. So now we're getting to the really more technical piece. So I'm trying to be high level, but still try to give you the most important thing, which is the browser, which, especially also started working here, have noticed how important the browser is and how important it is to browser parses properly and all that stuff, because this is the window to your content or to your web. All right, so what does the browser do? Why do we need a browser? Well, the browser renders content, content, and that's basically the process of displaying the requested content in your browser window, and that's the primary function of the browser. So this is what the browser does. There are a bunch of components that you see here. So we start with HTML. Well, the browser starts with parsing the HTML, which then leads to the construction of the DOM, the document object model. And the DOM is a tree structure that describes basically all the elements of the page. And then you have CSS at the bottom, which is cascading style sheets. It's render blocking, and what that means is that the browser first needs to load all the CSS file before it can actually render the rest of the content. And the CSS OM, which is the CSS object model, also has to process the style sheets in order to understand how those elements in the DOM should be displayed. And then we have JavaScript. That's kind of it's the power to manipulate and interact with the DOM, with the document object model. And JavaScript is also render blocking. So when used synchronously, so again, those are things, if you want to have a bit more information around that, this is something that you either can read in my book or can just read on the internet. So you don't have to buy my book because of that. And then you have the render tree at the end, so those three little pieces at the end. That basically combines the content style information and just mingles it all, merges it all together and shows it then. The important thing is when you think about the browser and how it renders everything, there's this thing called, or this terminology about the critical rendering path. And that is extremely important, especially when we talk about those elements, which ones should load first. You should have an understanding how the critical rendering path contributes to whatever is shown first on the page. So let's look at that. And again, it's okay if this is, for the ones who are not developers, this is too detailed. But the critical rendering path describes the code and resources, as I said, that are required to render the initial view of the page. Okay, so everything visible above the fold. And I'm reading out now those steps because I don't want to forget anything. So first, number one, so this is, I just created a page. So I have a style sheet loaded, then I say hello friends, then I have a picture of myself, and then I load some JavaScript. That's all I do. So number one is, yeah, the browser begins to construct the DOM after it receives the HTML. And that's also when the browser actually discovers the link tag, meaning the CSS file, and sends it to request and retrieve the CSS. And then number two, the CSS DOM, the object model, can only build when the CSS has arrived. So the DOM building can't be finished either because JavaScript hasn't been parsed yet. So again, you kind of keep seeing just like a blank page at this stage. And then once the CSS arrives, you can see the browser starts slowly printing out or showing hello friends. And then after that, the JavaScript can also be loaded, and then that unblocks the DOM to finish, and then the browser will merge DOM and the CSS object model, and then finally the browser can complete my little image and the hello friends. So takeaway here is not to do this every single time in your head, but it just helps to get a sense of what actually happens to your page and what the browser actually do. And it is important where you put elements on your page, and the order matters a lot. Teaser alert. So in the book I go through this whole thing of improving the critical rendering path. And I use some bookmarklets. Those are things that you can, I don't know, does anybody know what bookmarklets are? Yeah, okay. So for the ones who don't know, it's basically you add you have a piece of JavaScript that is saved as a bookmark, and then once you run this, it does something to, like, it can basically do stuff in the browser. And there are some really cool bookmarklets, free bookmarklets, that help you define and optimize your critical rendering path. So what I did here is I used one of those bookmarklets. Again, this is not, I didn't sit there for like 2 hours to come up with how the rendering path works, but rather used one of those bookmarklets. So you see at the top, this is my website without optimizing it for the critical rendering path. And then the second one is after running this bookmarklet. And I mean, start render time from 3.4 seconds to 0.7 seconds. Remember that 1 second delay that I was telling you about? I got some good improvement here. Oh yeah, that was like the animation here. And if you don't believe me, I even brought a little video. Hopefully that works. So this is how you see how fast one against the other loads. So very simple by just applying a bookmarklet. Some general things about determining the critical rendering path or optimizing it is, so HTML, keep it as clean as possible. Think about writing proper tags, and remove any unnecessary JavaScript function, anything like that. Order matters, as I mentioned. And I'm a big advocate for making sure that your third-party scripts are also properly included, because they can totally kill your website as well if you don't properly include them. So that's that. And then the 14 kilobyte rule, which basically means it is important for a good website to serve as much valuable content as you can within the first round trip. And the first round trip, so first time you push something to your user when they request your page, it is determined that basically the only 14K of your HTML can be transferred before a new round trip. And why is that so important? Because the start render time will be improved, and that goes back to the perception, what we said at the beginning, everything that loads faster, feels faster, and that's what you should focus on. So how do you follow the 14 kilobyte rule? Focus on the above the fold content first. Again, those bookmarks that I was referring to, they help you with that. They spit out basically for you this piece of HTML code that kind of represents the 14K, and you put it in, and that way you you can load the website, or you can improve the start render time. Yeah, some regular things. CSS is critical. Remove render blocking CSS. And the most important styles, especially the ones above the fold, should go inline. So if you have something, the footer styling that you do for at the bottom for your footer, you shouldn't be putting that inline at the top, because nobody's going to see that, because they still have to scroll. So the above the fold is what matters. And unblock the parser by using attributes such as defer and async. Those are fairly new JavaScript tags, or new tags when I wrote the book last year. So they help you also determine certain JavaScript files or code doesn't have to run right away. You can put those attributes in the script tag to say, hey, this can totally load at the very end. Don't even bother. Put scripts at the bottom, so they're not render blocking, especially not third-party scripts. That was that. Reduce bytes. That's another thing that we want to focus on, and also another chapter that I'm talking about. So you want to minify your page assets, such as HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Those are, I'm pretty sure you've probably, especially if you've been interested in web performance, those are kind of like the golden rules, what you should always do. You want to make sure that you know what kind of images you put in. It can sometimes be extremely different in terms of file size when you use a PNG versus a JPEG, how you compress it. You can save so much file size by knowing those techniques. And especially when we actually look at all the content that is being served on the internet, on websites, most of the things are images. So if you want to improve something, start with your images and check if they're really properly compressed. Avoid custom web fonts. If you want to use crazy cool web fonts, then at least make sure that you load them properly, because they could also be render blocking. Use Gzip techniques. I think I will talk about that in a second. This is a very easy and simple way as well to reduce the file size. Another one is reduce HTTP requests. So each request costs money. I think I've read somewhere. Basically, each request costs about 200 milliseconds. So if you have a lot of, you've probably all seen that you come to a website that has, I don't know, 15 or 16 or 20 images that needs to be loaded. They're all huge. It takes forever to load them because each request costs money. Concatenate where applicable. So to reduce the amount of HTTP requests, if you have 3 JavaScript files and they all are needed on that page, just combine them to one JavaScript file, because you're basically dropping 2 additional requests if you just put it in one file. Also, what I've been guilty of myself in the early days is that I just copy and paste some JavaScript files and frameworks, and then I'm fine, but probably I only need 2% of the file or the framework that I'm using. Don't maybe try to write it yourself. Image sprites is another technique. Again, those are things you can look up. I'm not going to go into detail with those to reduce HTTP requests. Lots of great techniques. Data URIs, I've done some stuff also actually when I used to work at the CBC. I tried to have a data URI, like the CBC logo converted as a data URI, and we could see there was some improvement in load time as well. So those are all techniques that I've applied myself before, and they work. So I wouldn't tell you to do them if they don't work. Big one is also, especially when it comes to mobile, is latency. Latency is basically the time it takes for the content to be requested by and sent to the browser. And latency can vary. It is affected by the distance the data has to travel. And the medium that it conducts it. So depends on, over Wi-Fi or stuff like that. And you experience a higher latency definitely, or specifically on mobile networks, because with mobile networks, the radio of your device needs to find the closest tower first to establish a connection. And if your device is idle, it can even take longer. So there's lots of criteria. So how do you fight latency? What can you do? So comes back to also reduce your HTTP requests. You have more latency on mobile devices. So again, this is something you should test, how your website performs on a mobile device. Reduce the amount of polling on your website. So if you have a news website or a ticker website where some news have to be fetched all the time, just be smart about not like constantly fetching stuff and polling from it. And we had the 14 kilobyte rule, so only send the most important styles down the wire as soon as possible. Also here I go through this. This is all stuff you can read up on in more detail. You want to remove any redirects. So even if you have, your whatever website and then redirect it to a mobile website, if you're on a mobile device, that is a redirect that costs money, that costs the user's patience. Maybe new techniques such as web SQL databases or IndexedDB, they help you to offline cache or store things on the client's or the user's browser, so you don't have to always request the same content over and over again. And there's a new HTTP version available now, which only works if you have a secure HTTP, so HTTPS server, but it helps a lot to figure out, or the HTTP, the server will handle most of the issues that could arise, such as prioritizing which resources should be loaded or not. Another thing that I always felt was interesting, although this book is more about front-end optimization, it's still nice if you pick up your server knowledge base and see if you can actually, if you have access to the server, the web server, to do things. Or as I said, maybe just make friends with the person who manages them. I mentioned Gzip. Gzip is, you compress basically assets such as HTML, XML, Java, JSON, and CSS. Another example, and again, Gzip is literally a setting in your web server configuration. It's just a one-liner that you turn on, and this is what happens when you turn it on or don't turn it on. Again, my website from 3.5 seconds to, from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. So there you have that 1 second again that could save lots of stuff. Another thing is you can cache things. So caching means that your browser keeps a version or caches a version, or the user's browser caches a version of whatever was sent to them. And this is something also you as a developer can define. So for example, here, what I have here, this is also, you can all do this with your web server configuration or talk to the person you work with. Think about it. So for example, this is my WordPress blog, and I know that I don't write blog posts every day, maybe once a month. And then I don't really upload new images at all, or rarely any images. So structure what your websites, the frequency of what pieces of your websites are being updated. If there's certain things that rarely update or change, put a very high cache policy on it. So that means that your user, when they request, let's say, your logo, when they request your logo once, you have a high cache policy on it of, let's say, a year or two. Ideally, if the person doesn't clear their cache or anything, but it will live a long time on the user's browser or device without having to refetch it every single time. So you can save some stuff there. Also here, read up on caching. This is, it can be fun to do that. And also here an example, what I did is, you can see without cache and with cache, I had 62% savings. So all not rocket science. It didn't take me long to do this. It's just good to know about those kind of things. Tame the mobile beast. So don't make the user pay for your bad performance. As I mentioned, data plans are still horrible these days, and even roaming. You don't want your users to get upset because you have for your mobile version this 2 megabyte image that you couldn't compress or didn't think about compressing. I also talk in the book about different ways of presenting mobile websites. There are some techniques that work. You've probably heard responsive web design before. Then you have res, which is kind of like a combination or hybrid of a bit of server optimization or filtering and responsive web design. All that stuff, again, you can read up on it. And also remember that mobile devices are powered by batteries, so images in JavaScript will also drain the battery of your user. And again, you don't want your website to be so heavy that you use it every single time that you go to your website, notice a drop in the battery notification, which shouldn't be that obvious, but over time that could happen. Consider offline storages. As I mentioned, especially for mobile, test your website on an actual device, because only then you'll feel the pain, basically. And another really fun one for me, at least, is you can automate most of that stuff. You don't have to do all of this stuff manually. That's why we're developers and engineers. We're lazy. We love to automate things. There are task runners that help you, such as Grunt and Gulp and Maven and I'm sure there's a new one that I haven't heard of. What task runners do is they take your source code that you're writing and optimizing it, concatenating your scripts, finding you have 3 scripts that are all similar, combining them, concatenating them, so you don't have to do this yourself. I've done this many times before, and it helped me a lot, especially during the deployment process, because you don't have to worry about those kind of things. You can let your machine do this. Also here, I used Grunt. Grunt has a bunch of very neat performance plugins that you can use. And so what I did is I have this, let's assume, this horribly written, coded HTML piece with a bunch of scripts and images that I haven't compressed and optimized. And then I hit a button and say, Grunt, run through my website and optimize it. And then Grunt optimizes it. All that stuff that I said at the beginning with compressing images, it will all do that for you. You see here, might not necessarily that was pretty good with the start render time, but you see my page speed score increased, meaning it got better. So a click of a button, and you get this stuff done. You probably need some time to set everything up, but once you set it up, you just run it every single time you want to deploy your website. Avoid the yo-yo effect. I think everybody who has done a diet before, it's like, yeah, I lost like, whatever, 10 pounds, and then you don't pay attention, and then you gain it back. And why is that? Well, because you probably get losing, like, yeah, but I'm fine. So it seems similar to me when it comes to websites. And also here, I noticed that when I worked at the CBC, that's exactly what happened. We were really good in optimizing things, and then all of a sudden, thanks to us monitoring the page load time, we noticed a huge spike, and all of a sudden, there was some script injected, and that made the website slow. I would have not noticed it if we didn't have those alert systems. So it's really good to have a monitoring system. There are free systems out there, or paid ones that you can hook onto your website, and it keeps monitoring and right away alerts you if something is up. Yeah, and I want to leave you with a quote at the end, and that's Google's layer page. Funny enough, and I kind of always try to remember that when I think about website, because browsing should be as simple and fast as turning a page in a magazine. And that's the end. So before I stop, 25% of the book of ebook, just give it to you one more time. You should buy the book. And if this was interesting to you, as Anna mentioned at the beginning, I also run the Web Performance Meetup group in Toronto. We talk sometimes very specific about certain topics that I might have mentioned. We have sometimes speakers that share their experiences, and we desperately need women there, okay? Because I think I'm the only one, or maybe 2 or 3. So if you're really interested in this, please go to meetup.com and look for Toronto Web Performance and join and come to our next meetup, which probably will be in May sometime. That's it now. Thank you.
That was really great. Thanks, Barbara. Does anybody have any questions? Put your hands right up in the air. June.
Hi. I was wondering about third-party scripts. Have you ever done any testing where there's a tag management system involved versus like the snippets on the page versus the snippets in an asynchronous tag management container and the impact on site speed?
I've never worked with tag managers, but I've heard of tag managers, and specifically, I think I once read a really good description about that that Etsy used for their third-party scripts. I don't have experience, but I mean the concept of bundling it all up and having it served by one instance rather than several could potentially be good. But again, you have to also rely on that system. Anything that you don't own, you should never assume that it will not go down. Like that's the thing. But then there's also things like asynchronous options that you can put yourself with several providers, and that should do it.
Any other questions? No. Oh, here's one.
Do you have any specific tips for optimizing WordPress websites?
WordPress website. Oof. Okay. So I feel guilty because I have my own WordPress website, and I even got even worse and have a GoDaddy domain. So this is like, I think you can't do it. Like, and then I look here, I'm standing and talking about web performance. But back to your question. So WordPress, I know that there is a plugin for WordPress blogs or themes that tells you, that actually runs a performance test on all those themes and tells you which of the themes are actually better. And it gives you like a scale of how bad the performance is. You know what, I can't remember. It might come back to me. I know that WordPress also recently did some of the technology improvements to combat their bad performance, but I can't remember right now.
Okay. Oh, one back here. Here's Henry. I'll just give you the mic. We're filming.
Thank you. With regards to WordPress, a lot of times it is database issues you can have. They say a lot of times that the back end is where you might find some of the major issues outside of the usual classic front end challenges like images. So I was actually going to say, ask Barbara, what do you think is the number one faux pas in web performance that people just constantly overlook?
That's a good question. I think just out of the rational idea, or when I think about stats and what websites consist of right now, I would think the first thing everybody should look at is images. Because again, images are mostly consuming our websites, and I would start there. Other than that, it really, like, I've seen, like even service providers or third-party script providers giving their clients uncompressed JavaScript code, where like, ooh, you should know. So it depends. But I think because images are a big piece of our internet, start there and optimize and compress.
Okay, one up front. Okay. 1 second. Try not to trip over cords here. Here we go.
Any thoughts on what you can do on the server itself to communicate with other databases? So let's say you have the web server that's maybe 5 front ends, and they all tap into, some sort of repositories that are part of your content. So any tools that you can have in the browser to actually separate between what is the web server's responsibility versus the communication to the data?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I might have also had it there, but maybe skipped it, was the use of a CDN, a content delivery network. So that would be my thing. So the CDN brings the content, or it's just basically copies of your website around wherever the CDNs are located, and that is faster retrieving certain things than maybe going to a server that sits in Europe. So that would be my thing. I know that certain CDN providers offer solutions where they actually start optimizing your page on their end, kind of like what I said with the concatenation and all that stuff. They do that on their end and then serve it to the client. I've never used it myself, but that would be something. So going through a CDN and then having them figure out how to optimize it could be an option if you can or don't want to do it yourself or your developers.
Hi.
Hi.
I may be misunderstanding it, but you mentioned using inline styles. Did you mean inline styles in your HTML? Really?
Yes. You probably, as a developer, you're like, oh, I was told I shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, but because, as I mentioned, with the 14K rule and the above the fold, that's just a very best. It might not be the cleanest way, but from a performance perspective, it's the fastest implementation, the fastest solution to get your styles rendered. And yeah.
Okay.
So you did understand probably, and you're right. That's what I learned as well back then. But for certain events or for certain situations, that's how it is.
But won't that?
Angular's trying to migrate.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh. Okay. Thank you.
Hello,
Hi.
I have a less geeky under the hood question. It's about WordPress. I'm just wondering, I'm not a developer, I'm a writer and an illustrator, but I work with WordPress, as do a lot of people. And I thought your reaction to WordPress was interesting. So I want to get a sense of maybe some of my pain points or what that facial expression was expressing. So what are some of the performance issues with WordPress that, you know, as you sort of scan the landscape, that you've noticed that people are having problems with?
So the thing is, I mean, WordPress is good, or the idea of blogging systems or content management systems are good because at the end it helps you, who is not a developer, create a website, and that's amazing. That's great. But having said that, you trust a system that then uses another developer who creates a theme on top of this system, and I find it's almost like a give and take in terms of if you're a really good developer creating a theme, because you want to have you customize the website as much as possible, you almost allow you, in this case, to potentially screw up the page because you want to move things and you want to do things, and to accommodate for that specific reason, performance sometimes or most of the time suffers because I think the translation of what the user wants to do with the website without being a developer and actually getting the end result, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, maybe sometimes a bit of hacking the way the code is then written. So I have yet to see a good WordPress theme. I haven't also looked that much. I just applied my WordPress theme. So maybe think about this, or what I mentioned, when you look for WordPress plugin or like performance plugin, it will tell you how bad or how good your theme corresponds to you changing certain things, and that might be something. I think it's a beautiful thing, as I said, that everybody can create websites and publish things. But if you're not a developer, yeah, you might have to sacrifice a few things. So yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hi. You mentioned the 14K rule several times, and I'm wondering your thoughts on getting that to work effectively when you're using frameworks such as Angular or React.
I don't, like, that's a very good question, and I'm happy if anybody, one of the developers here, I don't know, and I think that's, yeah, I don't know, I guess they perform, although didn't you just say that Angular was trying to move into that inline styling? So maybe that's which kind of goes back to like inline styling probably also will satisfy them.
JavaScript styling too with JSS is a new library for JavaScript where it changes the code, like the underlying document CSS, and it changes everything instantly after the page loads itself. So it's very responsive and very, very reactive.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, we have one right here. This will be our last question.
I was just wondering about your thoughts on using services like Cloudflare along with the like server optimizations.
Cloudflare is a right, it's a content delivery network, right?
And it can do things like Minify and
yeah, and that's
like
what
that,
I mentioned at the when we had this question here at in the first row. Some certain CDNs are trying to help you with that and doing basically what maybe that automation tool did on my end. If that works for you and if you can't do it yourself, I would always do it rather myself because I don't know how they're compressing things. I don't think there's a twist that I can like turn and do it the way I think it should be done. So if you want to give away that control to a CDN, please go for it. If you can do it yourself, I would always kind of keep an eye on that.
Okay, let's give a warm round of applause for Barbara.
Thanks.